Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. One of the things that I discovered along in life that I've had a long time struggling and trying to understand was when I first opened the book, A Course in Miracles. This was a particular book that was dictated to a woman in the late 1960s into the early 70s that had a profound change on the lives of many people around the world. One specific person who was a studious person of A Course in Miracles we've had on the Beyond 50 radio program is that of the wonderful writer Marianne Williamson. Later on in the years, in the late 1990s, our special guest today joining us on the program was one who discovered A Course in Miracles as well. She devoured that particular text over and over again. In fact, it would be more than 7 times over the course of 3 years, where it would profoundly change her life. Once the voice resonated and rang into her ears, with more than a half of a year of uncertainty and financial challenge, she heard the voice that told her, "You will no longer sell your mind for money. Your mind now belongs to God." And it was through that dictation that a secondary course, A Course of Love, was created. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mary Perron, who is that very special first receiver to create A Course of Love. And we're going to be talking about that here on the program as we discover exactly what that is. Mary, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Hi, Daniel. That was a good introduction.
Well, you know, when you work from a place of love, things just miraculously happen, don't they?
Absolutely.
Now, what I really got a kick out of your story, first of all, is that you are a devout Catholic, St. Paul, Minnesota, and you were really saying that at that point in your life as this came along, what you really wanted to do was to write mysteries and smoke cigarettes. I found that kind of interesting. Tell us the story about how this all happened for you.
Okay. Actually, it's a good story, and I'm just thinking because you told a little bit of it here. I don't want to redo it too much, but actually, at the time that I was wanting to be a mystery writer, I had my first spiritual experience, and it came about through a relationship that I had in my workplace. And it was with a woman who's actually 2 women, and they got pregnant together. And one of them, at the close of her pregnancy, found out there was trouble, and her baby died when she was 5 weeks old. Baby's name was Grace. And it was that opening it was a heart opening between the 3 of us that began a spiritual quest, with the baby's mother asking those questions, those life and death questions of how can this happen? How can, there be a God when a baby, an innocent would be taken like this? And then it just sort of exploded for us, where we were each, sort of exploring this in different ways and sharing with each other each day, because we worked together. We were sharing these things that were happening to us. And we wrote about them in a little trilogy of books called the Grace Trilogy. We wrote about these experiences. But I knew through those experiences that there was the possibility of a connection with the divine. So I'd moved beyond faith. So my Catholicism was a deep faith. But this experience that I had with my friends made me realize there was more. And actually, that dream that you mentioned came in the summer of 1996 when we were still working together. And the physical nature of the dream, what you see in a dream, what I saw was myself pushing this cart of books through a university hallway. And I was real familiar with the university, and it was these library carts with a lot of books on it. And it's so funny because I tell the story of the message I got in that dream a lot, but I didn't really think about the fact that I was pushing books in that dream. So that kind of means more to me now, because having a book come through you is like pushing a baby out into the world in so many ways. But anyway, so that dream was that I could no longer sell my mind for money. My mind belonged to God. And of course, I kind of felt right away like maybe it was calling me to leave my job, but that was unthinkable, And so I did spend a lot of time kind of trying to avoid it and push it away. And then I stopped being able to do my job. And I would joke about it being like a biblical affliction. And I just tried harder and harder. And eventually it dawned on me that I was being made incapable of selling my mind for money. And I left my job. And, all these things, A Course of Love, a lot of it is about becoming aware of a way of knowing that we have not been aware of. It's sort of the natural way of knowing that is ours as we were created, gets taught out of us in our life. And all these things, I kind of marvel about it sometimes because all these ways that I became certain of what was mine to do were so unusual to my usual ways of knowing. It was dreams, it was shared experiences with friends, it was having this affliction where I couldn't do my job. And then after I left my job and I was sort of broke and lonely, I started going to daily Mass. So I didn't quit being a Catholic because I found this other way. And every sermon that I heard when I went to these daily Masses was telling me to kind of trust in God. And so it was like I felt like something was coming, and I felt like something was coming, but nothing was coming, And then I picked up A Course in Miracles again. I hadn't read it for a while. And the first words that I saw when I opened it were, "Help is here." And that was another sign. And then sort of the final thing was my friend Mary, who I'd shared these early experiences with, came over one morning and told me that she'd had a dream in which she'd seen a new Course in Miracles. So again, there was this dream. And when she said that, I knew that was what I was being called to do.
I think it's really challenging, especially in this day and age, for a lot of us as we've been conditioned to look outside of ourselves for guidance. That somehow we've gotten to that point where we've surrendered our, I suppose, spiritual power out to the world, to an authority that somehow we seem to think knows more about how to guide us in the world with our lives than we do. And this is a critical time, especially now, going to A Course in Miracles, where it's very much needed for us to kind of turn that off, turn it around, and refocus that back to that inner knowing, as you were talking about.
It's crucially important. Yeah, there's like three things that stand out for me as the major messages of A Course of Love. And one, of course, is love. And there's a lot of ways, to think about love, and we can get back to that. But one of them is, as you say, this new way of knowing. And, even in spirituality, I think people can get stuck in that striving. And, it's like you go out to get this knowledge. You go out to see what other people have done or to learn what other people can teach. And it seems to me that not a whole lot of spirituality focuses as intently on becoming familiar with our own heart's knowing. And I believe A Course in Miracles sort of paved the way to that by making us see the insanity of our thoughts. So we can get so hung up in that, and we're thinking about everything, and we're trying to figure things out and, come up with our own meaning, and it's all sort of mental. And A Course of Love, it sort of begins with saying, your heart will now be your eyes and ears. And so this knowing of the heart is absolutely essential to A Course of Love and to us being who we are. That's the third thing. So those three things, love, being who we are, and this new way of knowing, are all really interconnected. And those are what I see as the three most valuable things that A Course of Love is bringing to us.
Mm-hmm. Now, for the listeners out there, I know that it is talked about in A Course of Love that it's about the Christ within us, that extension of God, that we are the Son of God, so to speak. That this was also a message that was shared with you. You were considered to be the first receiver from Jesus. Now, saying that, people might get the idea, so this is a Christian message, but it isn't. This here, as you talk about very directly, is really not abiding by any particular religious dogma. It is truly a course in love.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, yes. And I know many people still, it's hard to think that Jesus is coming again to bring us messages for our time. Even people that believe in spirit guides. And Jesus is kind of another thing sometimes. And, my own family, this is a hard thing to get your head around, or your, there's another reason maybe to turn to our hearts, because our hearts are more understanding of that felt experience of a connection to God or to Jesus or to, any of the religious figures. The wisdom traditions are also beautiful. And they have this way of conveying truth to you. And that was my experience with the Course in Miracles. I just felt like, this is truth. And that's why I stayed with it as I did. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there with that sense of truth. And of course, it was doubly so when I began to receive a Course of Love. And that, it's a hard concept to realize that we are in union. And in union, we all have that knowing of love and of God. And we've just forgotten it. And, of course, love says you can't be taught love, but you can come to recognize love again. And recognize means to know again. So we all know love, and we all know our divinity, but it's been covered over. And so A Course of Love is helping us to take that covering away, to quit hiding that part of ourselves. And so when it talks about being who you really are, it talks about being both human and divine, and that's a little bit new. That's a little bit of a departure, at least from the interpretations of A Course in Miracles.
Mm-hmm. I find it really fascinating, too, Mary, is that we're doing this segment here just before Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting about that is that when you take a look at that particular day and how it basically gets couples to go out there and do those special things for each other, proclaiming their love through symbols of outward gifts, if you will, I'd have to say, how would we then best define what love is? I think when we place it in that arena, it really gets confused about what love really is. Let's talk about that from the perspective of what we're talking about here today.
Mm. That's really true. I just did Valentine's with my grandson for his class.
Those cute little cartoon cards that everybody in class gets one of each from everybody.
Yeah, and you decide which one gets you are awesome and which one gets your top dog and stuff like that. And, but that's the world that we live in. And it's become very, commercial and consumer-oriented and all of that. But it's probably not going away too soon. But it is important to kind of separate that notion of love as sentiment, sort of the Hallmark greeting card notion of love from what love really is. And it's one of the reasons I was kind of excited about talking on an over 50s show, because I've just sort of begun to age. I'm going to be 60 next week, and it was like 6 months ago, if I felt like out of the blue, I suddenly woke up and felt old. Like at 58, I didn't feel old at all, but suddenly I woke up and I felt old, and then I had this new grandson, and I could barely hold him because he made my hips hurt, And the reason I'm saying that is because it's like, aging, sort of like when you're a teenager and you enter this time of change that is so total. It's like you are moving from a child to an adult, and your hormones are raging, and everything about you is changing, and you couldn't possibly know until you experience it what that's like. And I'm kind of seeing that same connection with aging. And I would just say the experience of love is kind of like that. Like, we think we know what it is, but when we really feel it, that's when we know it, And one of the things that we need to feel, I believe, much more than we have is self-love. And self-love just seems so crucial, and I think as we age, we begin to realize that it's crucial to every part of our lives. That if we don't love ourselves, we're not going to bring love to those around us. We're not going to bring love to the world. And we weren't ever taught really to love ourselves. Like we're not taught to go inward. We don't pay a lot of attention to self-love. So I think that experience of God is like an experience of self-love too. Because the way I have experienced this is that the more that I touch that place of union, and the more that my heart comes out from hiding. We all have our hurts and those things that have happened in our lives that close the door to our heart. And so we often need these kinds of works just to open again, to open to love and to letting ourselves be known. The whole thing about the ego is that it keeps our true self in hiding. It's kind of what we put out there because it's acceptable, and it can let us hide those things that we feel aren't the best about ourselves, or that we secretly have shame, or all that kind of thing. And so, coming to self-love is the big antidote for ego, and being able to live as true selves in the world.
It's fascinating when you come to hear about and read about and try to understand what the work of an ego is. I think people would come to a point realizing, well, I believe the ego is there to protect us. And I would challenge someone by saying, protect you from what? From being wrong about something or a perception that you may have in the world. And you take a look at, for instance, a lot of the arguments and maybe the battles and even the wars over the centuries, I think, are driven by ego, that need to say, this is the way I perceive or see and experience the world, and I'm right. And the way that you do it, well, I'm not so sure. And you kind of start to wonder, well, who's really the bad guy here? And I think what was fascinating, and this is just for me, I remember when The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia came out as a movie, I sat there going, what gives these guys to write that they think that they're the good guys and that these are the bad guys? They're both each wanting something for themselves. You may not agree with, let's say, the bad guy side, but don't they have just as much of a sense of right to live and to live happily as these good guys over here? And I think that was the first time, and this is as an adult, that I actually took that perspective about who gets to decide what is evil and what is good. And the duality that we seem to battle with constantly. And I know that as readers of A Course in Love, we'll begin to see this isn't like one of millions of books out there about relationships. This is specifically a relationship to yourself and God, if you will.
Yes, and also union and relationship are talked about in A Course of Love. And so that value in your brother, your brother and sister, that value in knowing and being known, the value in friendship and companionship, and not having, that's again that not having to go to the experts, that, right within your life, there are people with wisdom, and they come out of every tradition and every ethnic group. And I think, again, it comes back to being who you are, because, it's like, well, actually, I'm going to give you a quote from Howard Thurman. I just love this quote, and it really helps me explain things. He said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive." And that is, to me, so clear, because it's like we are, as a people, as a, in society, you're kind of taught to be a certain way, not to follow that thing in yourself that makes you feel alive. And I believe that if we each did that, if we each followed what made us feel alive and gave that to the world would change. And every time I use that quote, I think of someone else. And recently I used the example of a woman I knew when I owned a coffee shop. And she had loved bees all her life, was just fascinated by bees. And so she studied bees. And back in 2001, when the bee crisis began, when the honeybees started to die off, she became this called upon authority. And it's just sort of a great example of when you follow what makes you feel alive, when you follow your heart, your passion, you're going to give to the world that unique thing that you were born to give. And if you don't do that, then if you aren't fulfilled, that, it seems to me, is when the troubles start, because you take sort of en masse the goals of your society, your group, and you begin to act on those.
I'm reminded of a guest that I had probably about 2 weeks ago, and her book is When Did You Die? Or When Did You First Die, I think it was called. And it was specifically about how when we surrender that part of ourselves in a direction or in a place that doesn't really serve what we're supposed to be doing. You may go to a job, for instance, and realize, well, I do this out of necessity. It puts food on the table, a roof over my head, and clothes on my back. But then you realize you grudgingly go to work on that Monday morning known as the Monday morning blues. We've got hump day on a Wednesday, and then we've got thank God it's Friday. So we get to surrender and have that weekend to ourselves, realizing, well, somehow we're going to numb ourselves and forget about the fact, at least briefly, that I've got to go and do that again. And you can see how that creates a very slow death in many, many people, and how we can't trust the fact that, and you did this, and it was a pretty amazing, story in and of itself, that you were told not to sell your mind for money anymore. And so you thought, okay, well, I'm going to quit doing what I'm doing, going to the job that I go to. And all of a sudden you begin to feel that financial struggle that comes along with making a decision like that. And people would see or read this story and think, well, I don't know if I could do that, and that fear sets in. Mm-hmm. And, people recognize, for instance, or it is said that fear is the opposite of love, but in a course of love, they're actually, okay, and this is just a broad step, I could be wrong here, the same thing if you could recognize that's truly what it is.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That fear and love are the same thing if you recognize truly that's what it is. That the fear, for instance, is a way that you're being shown and signaled that if you could step into this in love, that is a lesson for you to learn, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I was picking up as I was reading A Course of Love.
Yeah, well, you're just putting it a little bit differently.
Okay.
That's
what my divine birthright is, I guess, to put things differently.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I love what you brought up, though, because one of the things that I have wondered about is if A Course of Love didn't come in this time, particularly because of some of the ways the world has gone since A Course in Miracles came out. So when A Course in Miracles came out, having a good job was not anywhere near as difficult. Getting a college education wasn't as difficult. Doing fulfilling work wasn't as difficult. And, what we're experiencing now is sort of these effects of sort of continued growth in the direction of the ego and the mind games that the ego plays, and this greed, that has come along and really affected everything. But in our country, I think we feel it here in the United States more because of the way we were founded. And I love Marianne Williamson and what she's been saying about you can't separate your spirituality and your love from the world. And that's Course of Love's message too. And so maybe it was just so much more needed now, this message of coming back to the heart, so that, there's actually a prophecy in A Course of Love which links the youth of this time with what's going on spiritually, I think, in saying that there's two big things that are going on. One is that spiritual people aren't as accepting anymore of indirect experience. So we have begun to feel direct experience. And young people, they don't want any indirect experience either. They don't want intermediaries. They don't want anybody telling them what to think and what to do. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that, I lost my train of thought.
So we have the youth that really doesn't want that intermediary, that person that is the middle person, so to speak, telling them it's through me that you'll find your way, so to speak, as long as you do it the way I tell you. And then you were following on to the next thing. And it's okay if we don't find out what it is until later.
But so the kind of reading this many, many times as I have over the years since I received it, and how you come to see things differently that are said, and so this part that talks about that we're going to be in this new time. So it says these young people are born into this new time, and it kind of hints that the structures that fed the old time, the structures of the ego, are going to begin to fall. And there's going to be this new future that we have to create. And that is something that I really have felt coming in recent years, at least since this last recession of 2009, and that we are moving into a new time, and we have to, if we're going to change the direction that we're going in on this earth.
I think, too, what we're seeing is the breaking down of human structures, those sort of human-created things. And when you talk about the youth today, I know some of the things that I'll hear is, well, they're kind of out of touch, there's no work ethic, they just don't seem to grasp and have the kind of integrity about the things that are really important. And if you step back and look at those messages and you realize, no, this is generations before that were put into a world of tasking. For instance, the Industrial Revolution, we found a way to be that cog in the wheel, so to speak, and so we began doing things because that's the way our parents did them. So they must have been right. Look at how far they got. But you can see over time, too, that there was a sense of misery beginning to set in, because you get to that point as you approach midlife, and of course you've heard the quote, the term, the midlife crisis, it's a point where you start recognizing in your life, and it could happen in your 30s, it could maybe even happen in your 20s or even in your teens, who knows, but it does happen, where you begin to scratch your head and say, I've done things the way I was told I was supposed to do it. I have done things in a way that I thought would bring me the approval that is necessary for me to know that I was doing the right thing. But for some strange and odd reason, they just don't work the way I thought they were supposed to. You were bringing up the '09 recession, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to go to work and earn a good income and put our money into the banks for a future that tells us once we're done working and we're older, we can just settle down and enjoy taking it easy. Well, there's not a whole lot of people that are going to be able to do that, even though they followed the rules, because there were other people that really didn't follow the rules, so to speak. And so you look at that, and for instance, the other thing that's breaking down to that I've seen quite a bit, especially in the youth of today, is that it is estimated that 1 out of 2 young people who go and attend school probably won't finish high school, okay? We're supposed to go to high school. We're supposed to, after that, go to college, then go get that career, settle down, and have a family. See, that's what we were told was the right way. In fact, it's become so consistent and prevalent in our language that it's become the American dream. And I'm thinking, that's not what the American dream really is. The American dream is, as you were talking about earlier, is that fire inside of you that says that you can express that specialness that you have, that gift that you are, into a world, and America makes it to where you can succeed with that, however that looks. You've got the freedom to do that. That's what makes it a great country. But when you realize, as you hear the presidential pundits and the people running for offices spouting off to get that house, to get that car, to get your kids through college, that's the American dream. I'm thinking, and the youth is recognizing this is all nonsense. And I think that's very encouraging. And A Course of Love helps people to break down that and start thinking for yourself again, start living for yourself again, because if you can't, then how do you serve others with what that specialness inside of you really is?
Right. I remember when I started seeing, I have 3 children, and when I started seeing, the young people growing up around my children's age, I thought the way they were going to change the world, just remembering this as you spoke, I thought, well, they're not going to put up with a 5-day work week,
No.
I thought they just were not that into work, and I thought they would make these changes that would be like, okay, let's everybody work to work, and you work 3 days a week, I mean, I thought it was going to happen within the same structure, and I just could not have foreseen what has come to be. And I was a single parent for some years, and I feel particularly bad for all the single parents out there now, because when I was a single parent, you could still, I got my job at the University of Minnesota, and I could support myself, but it's very, very hard for people now. And so this unlearning message of A Course of Love, it starts right at the very beginning, kind of talking about you're going to come to the end of learning. And that's a really radical statement. And it's one of the things I find people have the hardest time with The Course of Love, especially people who come to it from A Course in Miracles, because A Course in Miracles has been studied in groups for many, many years. And so people want to study this course, and people would like me to teach this course. And so it's been interesting trying to find other ways of doing things than teaching and studying. And, maybe you start out that way a little bit, but you have to let it go. And so that's one thing. And also this whole period of unlearning. So we have to kind of get rid of all that stuff that we've done to believe is true, like you were talking about with, what we believe in America. But also just about ourselves, too. That we are these, it can be any number of things that we believe ourselves to be that we need to see through. And only getting back to the heart really does that, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more. I know that it's interesting. I was just thinking about this, that I tried the first time reading A Course in Miracles, and it was in the 1990s.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I got it from the library, and there was also an accompanying workbook, I guess, that came along with it. Not necessarily one that I think you actually write in, or maybe you could, but there it was. And as I began reading, I thought, wow, this is really some deep sort of writing here. It was really, to me, kind of interesting. And, when I had found out that you had read A Course in Miracles, some 7 times over the course of 2 years, I was describing to someone just recently that in reading A Course of Miracles, what it tends to do is it actually begins to, and this is my words, it breathes into you in a way that it's almost as though there is an inner voice that starts waking up and you start hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't, for instance, there's a book with some text in it and I'm reading it and I'm separate from it. It actually sort of merges with you. Now, I've also had a discussion here and there about A Course in Miracles with other people, and some people were actually kind of offended by A Course in Miracles, and I said, well, really what bothers you about it, do you think? They said, well, that was written by, at first it was someone who was unknown, so to speak, and then, well, it was somebody who allegedly channeled Jesus. And I said, oh, that's what bothers you about this, okay? Says, well, that channeling stuff, and you start thinking of those people that channel spirits. And I said, how is that any different from the Prophet Muhammad? How is that any different from Moses? How is that any different from Abraham? And I went on and on and on. And I said, they all received a message that was the same thing. But you're somehow kind of putting this in a perspective, that this is some sort of ungodly sort of thing. Do you really know much about this? And I find that so fascinating that we hold on to beliefs without really challenging, how do these beliefs really serve me if all they do is protect me from something that I don't know or that I'm afraid of? And I know that's what A Course of Love addresses.
I know. I belonged to a centering prayer group for a while, and that's sort of the Christian form of meditation. And I eventually shared with them about A Course of Love, and it was so, they were very polite, but it was so non-engaging. It was like, this is not anything, we can read about anybody from the past, but we can't bring it into here and now. And so I really agree with you there that change of thinking is, it's kind of something that, to me, it only makes sense. But, you mentioned Marianne Williamson, and, after she ran for the House of Representatives and didn't win, she put out this statement, I think it was on Huntington Post or something, but she talked about the reasons that people said they didn't vote for her, and it was because of her spirituality. They said because of that, they didn't think she was serious. And I thought that her putting that out was really, really important, because spirituality, kind of in the 90s, when it kind of sounds like you and I discovered it around that time, in the mid-90s. And I remember then there were like 5 New York Times bestsellers that were spiritual. And one of them was iffy in terms of being very good. It was The Celestine Prophecy. But there was Thomas More's Care of the Soul. There was a book by the Pope called Hope. I can't remember the rest of them. But there was this period that we went through, I think, when spirituality was acceptable. And then it, too, I think, in a way that it became commercialized. So now it is aromatherapy and massage and meditation practices and things like that.
Homeopathy.
Yeah. But why not say it right out? I mean, I think I was really thrilled that she said that right out, that people are making decisions against the against it. So you've got spirituality sitting over here by itself and the rest of the world going on as it is. And I applaud her for trying to bring that together. And I believe that's what we each can do in our own ways by bringing our hearts and our minds together. That is another one of Course of Love's major messages. It's called wholeheartedness in the Course. So if you kind of end that conflict between your mind and heart, and you can go out in the world and be who you are, we can all make a difference. And we don't have to feel like, one person, we can't make a difference, because we can. And I really do believe that.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, what also A Course in Miracles brings that I had seen, and again, I haven't read the whole thing, and it isn't a book that you just pick up and read like a story. There's more to it than that. It's a way that you embody what it shares into, as you said, direct experience of living, and living through the heart. And, what's really interesting is I remember discovering Christianity through the back door, if you will, because I was more interested in, this was in the early 1980s, in Zen for some reason. That was sort of my message, if you will, like, wow, this is interesting, let's follow this and see where it takes me. And I said, as I was following this, it began to lead me in these other areas of spiritual development. And again, as I said, through the back door of Christianity, I thought, well, this is a different way that I'm experiencing what the message of Jesus Christ really is. This was a guy out there trying to teach people to not only live through their hearts, but also to see that miracles are something we all do. He wasn't saying, hey, look at me, put me up on a pedestal, I'm the only one who can do this, follow me. What he's trying to say is, follow what I share with you, so the greater things that you will do than I. And it was interesting how that message got skewed to a point that it seemed that more people who, I guess, practice Christianity, and I'm not saying everybody, seem to always want to idolize Jesus on the cross. And I keep thinking, why do you keep looking at that message rather than what he was really sharing before he was put on the cross, and live that way? And that's what I found, A Course in Miracles is kind of like, well, if it was really Jesus speaking the message, he slipped out and said, I don't know what happened over here, but I'm going to see if I can do this again, and maybe you'll get it this time. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing.
And I know that's bold for me to say it, but I've said it on the program many times. It's not pointing fingers and saying, no, you Christians, you don't get it right. It's, when will you see and share that part of the message that people can learn?
In the later part of A Course of Love, Jesus says, if you're religious, stay within your religious communities, because you will find there the signs. So it's like wherever you are, if you're comfortable there, if you have an affinity for that place, you can find what you need to take you further there. And just, I have to say this, because you were talking about Jesus on the cross. One of the things I love is how Jesus, when he came back to life, after the resurrection, when he came out, he had his wounds. And I've been thinking about that, too, in relation to aging, because it's like you can't hide. I can't hide that I smoked for 40 years because I have yellow teeth, okay? So it's like you can't hide where you've been in life, in a way. And he came with his wounds, and he made Thomas put his hand in that wound. And I think part of that, as a message to me, is that we don't have to hide our wounds. We don't have to hide our mistakes. Jesus was absolutely not about that, He did not, I have had some people like, why would Jesus come to you, kind of like you've led, and no, he didn't come to the perfect people. He kind of stayed away from them, the people who thought they were perfect. So I do think there is some message in that that's related to our humanity in the suffering. It's related to our humanity, and that all of these things that happen to us in our lives, the mistakes, the failures, the pain, all of it can bring us to a greater height of knowing of ourselves, of compassion, of love. And, when I meet people, and you really can. You can see on a person's face, especially as they age, somebody looks so interesting because of this light in their eyes or the particular way they're wrinkled, and you try to get a conversation going with them, and it's like, yeah, my kids are in college, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, no, I want to know what you are about. And so I've started to do a couple of interviews. I just did my first 2 because I want to know what people's experiences of A Course of Love are too. I want to know how they change and in their words. And so I'm, very admiring of the way you've done this interview. But that openness, being able to talk to each other and share who we are. That's my favorite quote of A Course of Love, by the way. It's that you have to share who you are to be who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just be who you are in your own mind and in your own little cubicle or something. You have to share to know. And I found that to be really, really true.
Real fascinating thing, too, for the listeners out there is, and I remember, and this is sort of in the beginning of the book, but I remember when I came to a knowing a few years back about this, and that is whether it's good or it's bad, and we're talking about the experience that you have, you'll come to a point where either way will be okay. And, you could read something like that and say, well, I think I understand what you're talking about here, that you accept the good with the bad, so to speak. But when you come to know that they're both equal, you realize that's very empowering. It's almost as though fear begins to dissolve because you start looking forward, not necessarily because you want it, but for the bad to reveal itself, because you realize in that there's something for you to learn from, something for you to start exercising that muscle and to grow with. And it's funny because I think sometimes people who especially decide to awaken to a religious path, if you will. I remember a friend of mine some years back who decided to start going to church, and she became a self-professed Christian and just loved talking about how the fact that I'm a Christian now. And it was interesting that after about 2 months, I think it was, she one day came to me and had a sense of frustration. She says, I go to church every Sunday and I go to Bible study every Wednesday night, and I don't feel any happier. And the only question I could ask her was, what made you think going to these functions, would do that for you? And the funny thing was, she didn't have an answer for that. And I said, you're just beginning. Give it time, because you'll find that you will be happy, whether something is good or whether something is bad as an experience. And in A Course of Love, as I was reading that, I was reminded of when you come to know that, it's very liberating, isn't it?
It is very liberating. There's this book I really like, and I don't mind recommending. It's called Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, about the second half of life. And it really is like a life starting over when you find spirituality, I believe, when you find a way that's true for you. And that's the whole key, is it's true for you. You feel it in your heart. You have that not the not where you'll argue everybody down about it, but just the conviction that you found something that is, it's like a reality. It's like a new reality, I believe, when you come to this place of knowing and this place of just being. I always hated that. I thought it was so cliche when people would just talk about, just be, just be. But there is a very big change when it happens, that you kind of leave behind those ego-building ambitions of the early part of your life and sort of the attraction to drama and all of that, and you begin a new period of life that is really a new reality. I was actually surprised recently. I'm doing an audiobook now of A Course of Love, and so I'm rereading the first chapters, and I was surprised at how early in the course Jesus started talking about love as a reality and entering this new reality. And when you were talking about reading A Course in Miracles too, it's for me, I just fell into it. And I would just read it, and I had no particular understanding of it. And I didn't feel like I needed it. It was it just kept, washing over me. I think you might have used those words. And so there's sort of this allowance of a knowing to come to you rather than going out to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And entering into, I love that phrase. A Course of Love ends with dialogue and talks about how, kind of our new way. The new way isn't this teaching, learning hierarchy, but being in dialogue. And even in one place he says, agendaless dialogue, so that you're coming into your, conversations with people without that agenda, without driving something in a certain direction. And he talks about that as entering the dialogue. And I just love that phrase.
Mm-hmm. What our listeners should come to understand, too, is they develop their spirit is the more it develops, the faster manifestation begins to happen. And it's not to turn this into something about attracting materialism, but is that you truly begin to attract that which you think at a faster rate. And sometimes it's very scary because, it's interesting how you hear a lot about the law of attraction and, manifestation and of course, the movies and the books that surround all that. Sometimes it can drive a person crazy, but the fact is there is an inherent truth in what's being shared there that when you slip under the surface and look a little deeper, as what we're talking about here today, you realize there is a truth, that there is a genie within inside of you, if you will. But you have to really be careful, and I know that in A Course of Love, that although A Course in Miracles had many exercises for a person to do because it was about reversing thought, about getting a hold of that thought and realizing, oh, that's where it all started. Now, if I can begin to utilize my mind to serve me by going through the heart, we got a different lifestyle altogether going on here. And I know that in A Course of Love, you talk about how it's time to stop looking at things in a dualistic perspective, that I am separate from that, but that you are one with that thing. And one exercise that you had in there that I found really fascinating because it was so simple, and I thought, is that when you start getting that chattering thought, that mind going on, really start listening and paying attention to your thoughts, that what you do is that you say to yourself, I dedicate all thought to union. And when I read that, I thought, that's awfully simple. Now, talk about that a little bit, if you could, for the listeners.
Well, I'm actually going to go back to what you were saying about intention, because I think this goes along with it, that it's more, with the Course of Love, about allowing. So that dedicating all thought to union is one easy way that I talk about it is I don't have to do it on my own. I don't have to make it happen. So for me, it's been like moving out of that intention phase into I am open. It's about receptivity. And I believe that, I feel receptivity is a feminine way of being. And this course and this focus on love is a more feminine way of being. And so that, to me, of course, and we all experience these things differently, and I'm not going to tell anybody how to experience anything, but for me, that phrase of I dedicate all thought to union was sort of quit thinking, a quit thinking thought, and let it come. Because what's going to come to you is going to be much more powerful than what you're going to think you want to have come to you in the first place. Just let the universe do its job. And be there, be there, show up, listen, be attentive, and express yourself, And that's my basic way of seeing that one, is I dedicate all thought to being in that place of union where everything is connected and where things are going to happen, not without my volition, but things are going to happen in connectedness, in a relationship with everything else that's happening. And, in terms of, like we were talking a little bit about politics, I was thinking a few years ago that I wanted to be a little bit more active, and then I couldn't stand the sort of bureaucracy of it. But I kind of found that the people that I really admire who did become very active got there from a place of they were there. It was like it came to them almost. It's like it comes to you what is yours to do. And that is something to be comfortable with, I think, that if you are meant to become active for a cause, it's going to come to you. And so for me, I am, active with the Course of Love right now, and that's a way of serving, too.
Mm-hmm. Most importantly, too, as you were saying about allow that mystery to show up. That's what makes life really exciting.
Absolutely, you're right. Yeah, if something could come to you tomorrow that you have no idea is coming, but it's going to be there. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of a gift, if you're intending too hard, sort of like if you're putting too much effort into something, you're going to block the gift that's waiting to come. If you just be receptive to it, to be open to it. So I love the receiving that's talked about in A Course of
Love. Such a fascinating conversation. I wished we had another hour to do. But, in the few minutes that we have left here, what has been the reception of A Course in Love from people? Has it been enthusiastic, mixed? Have you had a few people standing there going, what are you trying to do?
Yes, there have been a few like that.
There always is, isn't there? And those are the ones we need to love and pay attention to the most.
Yes, that's true. Well, when A Course of Love first came out, I felt like it went out into a void, like it was just devoured, and there was really no response. And I was so disappointed. Then you go into that feeling of, I must have done something wrong, but
where's that mind again?
Or that. I think if you have a mission, that was sort of the way it felt to me. I had a mission. I was to bring this to the world, and so it seemed like I must have had something to do with it wasn't getting out to the world. So there you go again with that. It's going to be when the time is right, and it's going to happen. Not without my help, but there's going to be a greater force at work. And so this has happened more recently, and happened really in a quite wonderful way during my time of thinking I was going to be more political, and I was getting interested in feminism, and I went to give a talk about women in spirituality, and I met this man who ended up becoming the publisher of A Course of Love, and he was asked me, well, how can I be helpful to you? He was a lawyer. Could I help you with this or that? And I said, you want to be helpful to me, be my publisher. And it was out of me. It had no, there was sort of no forethought to it. It was all so easy, and everything happened so fast after that. And we both, that sort of willingness that is talked about, there was this willingness on all sides, and I think the time was just right. And so since this new publication, there's really been a very good reception, and more Course in Miracles people are being accepting of it and welcoming it. And there are a few, who still think that it is just plain wrong,
Mm-hmm.
It's wrong that it exists. But that's going to happen. And I think too, the reception is different. There's one of my friends, one of my best friends, she was in the very first Course of Love group that ever met, 10, 15 years ago. And I quote her all the time because she says the Course of Love is like oven cleaner. And it's just going to make everything that you need to get rid of bubble up. And it's not going to give you any peace. And, and she can go on and on about how awful it's going to be. But it's an aid. It's an aid in that. There are these things that need to bubble up, and so we can wash them off. And it brings us that, too. So maybe, a first reading of A Course of Love might make you feel, really super joyful and, ready to go out and love the world. And then you might get a little bit of a pause where you're going to confront some things that you need to. Like we need that healing of ourselves, the self-love. Like, for me with my single parent years, I carried the sort of disappointment and shame and, it was this, that whole free love time, but I still, I was raised a Catholic girl and I just felt really bad, and then it was so hard to be a single parent, and, I just had all these sort of feelings of, it was nobody's fault but mine. I was a fool, things like that. So there was, even into, my second marriage and being loved and having, a good life, I still carried those things around. And so I think A Course of Love is going to be the oven cleaner that washes all that clean eventually. But sometimes you have to go through some steps. You have to take a look at that. And it's good to have companions on the way. But it also makes you able to share yourself as you, to share those mistakes, because everybody's had them. And then they become almost not mistakes, when you can just let go the charge that accompanies them. So it's an adventure. It's really an experience, a sort of long experience. I don't think it leaves you once you come into it to find that love again. It'll take you through some dark places sometimes maybe, but it will bring you to peace. And I believe that's what we're all looking for, that we would like that peace of being who we are and feeling love and being ready to meet the world that way, from that authentic and true place.
Course of Love is the book. Our guest today, Mary Perron. Is there a website our listeners can go to?
There is, and I'm sorry I didn't correct you about this before, but I'm going to tell you how to pronounce my name, which is Mari Perron.
Mari, I should have known better. I was speaking with a Facebook expert, and her name is Mari, and she says it's Mari, like in calamari, but you wouldn't have known that.
Oh, calamari, that's
I thought that was cute. Anyway. And the website?
Yes, and it's very simple, www.acourseoflove.com.
Very good. Mari, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. I'd look forward to a dialogue like this again down the road.
Well, thank you. I would be very happy to do that. You're really good at this.
Well, thank you. Well, that's my course, I guess. Thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Find out more also by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We also have our exclusive e-news updates. Sign up for those as well. They're absolutely free. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.